Most people think a reset happens when life slows down, when stress eases, when circumstances improve, when motivation finally returns. But that's not how real resets work. Because if life had to cooperate before your mind could change, nothing would ever shift. What most people call a fresh start is really just a pause. They rest for a moment. They feel lighter for a few days. They regain hope. And then, quietly, the same thoughts return. The same reactions resurface. The same emotional patterns take over. And they wonder why the reset didn't last. Here's the truth most people never hear. A mental reset doesn't happen when your environment changes. It happens when your internal orientation changes. You don't reset by escaping pressure. You reset by changing how you relate to it. Most people enter a new year mentally exhausted, but still operating from the same internal posture. Always bracing, always reacting, always managing, always preparing for the next problem. They want peace, but they don't release vigilance. They want clarity, but they don't release mental noise. They want direction, but they don't release old narratives that no longer apply. So the mind never resets. It just reorganizes stress. And that's why New Year's often feel hopeful at first and heavy shortly after, because the mind never let go of the state it was living in. A real mental reset doesn't add anything. It removes. It releases outdated assumptions. It loosens constant urgency. It interrupts automatic self-talk. It creates space where there was only pressure. And until that space exists, no new identity can take root. 2026 doesn't require more effort from you. It requires a mind that is no longer carrying yesterday's tension into tomorrow's decisions. What comes next is understanding what actually prevents the mind from resetting, and why most people unknowingly reinforce the very state they're trying to escape. The mind doesn't stay overwhelmed because life is hard. It stays overwhelmed because it never receives permission to stand down. Most people carry an internal posture that's constantly alert, scanning for problems, anticipating disappointment, rehearsing conversations, managing outcomes before they happen. That posture becomes normal. So even when life slows down, the mind doesn't. This is why vacations don't reset people, why weekends don't restore clarity, why time off still feels mentally loud. Because the mind never learned how to complete a cycle. It stays open, it stays unresolved, it stays vigilant, and vigilance is exhausting. Here's the key insight. Mental fatigue is not caused by effort. It's caused by unresolved internal loops, thoughts that never finish, emotions that never settle, decisions that never feel complete. The mind keeps returning to them because it believes something is still required. A true reset happens when you consciously close loops, not by solving everything, but by releasing the need to keep holding it mentally. This is where most people get stuck. They think clarity comes from figuring more out, from analyzing harder, from planning better. But clarity doesn't come from addition. It comes from completion. Completion of outdated narratives. Completion of emotional reactions that no longer need your attention. Completion of internal questions that don't require answers anymore. And until those loops close, the mind stays active, even in stillness. A reset begins when you change your relationship to what your mind keeps revisiting, not by forcing it quiet, but by teaching it that it's no longer responsible for holding everything together. What comes next is the deep shift, the moment the mind learns it is allowed to rest without losing control. There is a moment when you realize the mind doesn't need more control. It needs safety. Most mental overload comes from one belief running quietly underneath everything. If I don't stay alert, something will go wrong. So the mind stays on. It stays sharp. It stays tense. Not because it wants to, but because it believes vigilance equals protection. The deep shift happens when you recognize this. Your mind is not exhausted because it's weak. It's exhausted because it's been loyal. Loyal to keeping you prepared. Loyal to preventing pain. Loyal to managing outcomes in advance. And loyalty doesn't disappear through force. It releases through reassurance. A true mental reset begins when you stop demanding silence from your mind and start offering it something far more powerful: permission to rest without consequences. This is where people usually panic. They think, if I relax, I'll fall behind. If I stop thinking, I'll lose control. If I let go, everything will collapse. But that fear is not intuition. It's conditioning. Conditioning that equated tension with responsibility. The shift happens when you realize you can be present without being tense. You can be prepared without being hypervigilant. You can care without carrying everything. And the moment you allow even a brief experience of relaxed awareness, something important happens. Your nervous system updates. It learns, we rested, and nothing bad happened. We released control, and we're still okay. We didn't manage everything, and life continued. That experience does more than any affirmation ever could, because your subconscious learns through experience, not explanation. This is how the mind begins to reset, not by erasing thoughts, but by changing the state they arise from. And once the state changes, the thoughts naturally soften. What comes next is how to gently reinforce this new state so it becomes the foundation you carry into 2026, instead of a moment you briefly touch and lose. A real mental reset doesn't come from escaping your life. It comes from changing how you enter each moment. The micro-shift is simple, but it's powerful. You stop carrying the entire year inside the present moment. Most mental overwhelm comes from time compression. You're thinking about next week while living today. You're managing outcomes that haven't arrived. You're emotionally preparing for things that may never happen. So the mind never rests, because it's never where the body is. The reset begins when you practice mental containment. You give the mind a clear boundary. Not everything belongs in this moment. Right now only requires what you're doing, how you're feeling, what's actually in front of you. Nothing else needs to be carried. This doesn't mean ignoring responsibility. It means placing responsibility where it belongs, in its proper time. When future thoughts appear, you don't argue with them. You don't analyze them. You gently place them back where they belong. Not now, later. This moment is enough. Each time you do this, your nervous system learns something new. We don't have to hold everything at once. And that lesson is profound, because the mind relaxes when it knows it will be allowed to return to things later. This is how presence becomes safe, not by forcing focus, but by creating trust. Trust that you won't forget yourself. Trust that you won't drop the ball. Trust that being here won't cost you the future. These moments of containment may only last seconds at first. That's enough, because seconds of true presence interrupt patterns of constant vigilance, and interruption is the doorway to reset. What comes next is the closing realization, the understanding of what a reset truly is and how to carry it forward into 2026 without effort or force. A real mental reset is not something you achieve once and then try to maintain. It's a relationship you build with your inner world. a relationship rooted in trust instead of control. When you stop treating your mind like something that must be managed and start treating it like something that needs safety, everything softens. You realize you don't need to think less. You need to carry less. Less anticipation, less rehearsal, less self-monitoring, less pressure to get it right. And in that space, clarity returns on its own, not because you forced it, but because you stopped interfering with it. This is the shift that carries into 2026. You no longer begin days bracing. You no longer move through life with your shoulders tight and mind racing. You no longer confuse tension with responsibility. You begin each day present, and presence changes everything. It changes how you decide. It changes how you respond. It changes what you notice. It changes how long stress stays with you. From that place, you don't need a dramatic reinvention. You move calmly. You choose deliberately. You rest without guilt. You act without panic. And those small, consistent shifts shape an entirely different year. Not because 2026 demanded more from you, but because you finally gave your mind permission to reset. And when the mind resets, the future doesn't feel overwhelming. It feels open.